Hello everyone, it's Francis Widowson here. The reason for this video is that I wanted to discuss with you something that I think is of the utmost importance at this juncture in history. And that is the conversations that have been taking place about the residential schools, uh, and specifically the Kamloops case, which on May 27th, 2021, it was announced by the Kamloops band that the remains of 215 children had been found. And this resulted in the unfolding of an incredibly complex sequence of events. And it was found out quite soon after that announcement that remains had not been found, that it had been anomalies or targets of interest on the ground penetrating radar. In spite of this announcement being made, this didn't seem to have any effect, or had very little effect, on how people were conceptualizing what had happened at Kamloops, and also the other, what was called discoveries, which were not discoveries, of unmarked graves at near residential schools, which were graves in cemeteries that were at one time marked, but then the markers had deteriorated and blown away. So we had this confusion that was taking place between discussions about graves in cemeteries, which no one should be surprised about finding remains in cemeteries, versus clandestine burials. And the Kamloops case cannot be anything but clandestine burials, because it's not a cemetery. The cemetery for the Kamloops band is on the reserve across from their church. And so these things have been confused. And what has been discovered after doing research on this for 3.5 years is that the Kamloops band has been quite closely involved in the perpetuation of the misinformation. Now, that's an interesting question as to whether it is intentional or unintentional. I'm still kind of trying to think this through. But what I wanted to do today is just go through a document that I have created, a post that I've created on the wokeacademy.info site, because I think that there is incredible information that is on that site. Now, a lot of this already has been documented by the researcher, the wonderful researcher Nina Green, who really is the person who you can't question as helping many researchers, including myself, come to a much better understanding of the Kamloops case and all the other residential school cases. But in Nina's site, it's a much broader swath that she's done. With what I've done is I'm just trying to go over some documents that are specifically related to the to the announcement of the remains of 215 children. And the reason why I've come across many of these now, and I'm trying to organize them, is that on October 29th, I did a talk at Brock University called "The Grave Error at Kamloops." I believe what are the implications for academic freedom? But originally, I had tried to give that talk at the University of Regina, and the subtitle was "Should it be described as a hoax?" And I think that's still a very important question that I have not made up my mind about. But what I wanted to do is present documents pertaining to this, because I am currently producing a video with Greg Wycliffe, who is a freedom of expression advocate in Ontario. And as part of the development of this video of the lecture, I was going through the sequence of events pertaining to the announcement of the fine, that 215 remains had been found, and then all the other surrounding kinds of events that occurred. And I wanted to go into detail about these documents, and there's not enough time in the lecture. There wasn't enough time in the lecture to do this. and that will give me the opportunity of doing that here. So what I'm going to do now is share my screen to the wokeacademy.info site. And what you'll notice here is that, and I should just go back into the wokeacademy.info site. I have a lot of information on this site, the arbitration decision being the most important right now in terms of my case, which I'll be talking about in more detail over the next few months, also about my firing. But what I do is I also put posts on the right-hand side here. And what you'll notice is the top post is the Kamloops Band's February 7th, 2022 document about the missing. And I just found this document when I was trying to find other documentary evidence for this lecture that I did on October 29th, and the video that Greg and I are producing. And I was quite amazed to find this document because I hadn't seen it before. And it's on the UN sites, a United Nations site, which I find is very interesting in its own right. And you can go into that by just clicking on this link. But as well, I have provided the actual document here, which if you just go on this chevron on the upper right hand corner of the document, it will allow you to go into this document, which is 14 pages long. And I highly recommend looking at this document, because this document, according to and I'll talk about this shortly, seems to have been produced on February 7th, 2022. And it gives a whole bunch of amazing information that supposedly the Kamloops Band wanted to talk about to the United Nations, or we're not sure exactly who. Anyway, Ted Gottfriedson is the person who's identified as this as the contact. Anyway, so that's the actual document if you want to take a look at it. Anyway, so as I mentioned, it was supposedly a presentation. I'm not sure if it was given by Ted Gottfriedson, who's a prominent member of the Kamloops Band, or someone else. He's the identified person associated with it. When we looked at the document properties, we found that it was created by a person by the name of Carrie Marchand, who, in doing some searches, turns out that she is the manager of recruitment and admissions for an organization called the First Nations Technology Council. Now, we're not sure if Marchand actually created that document or whether it was the First Nations Technology Council. It was just their license, and someone was using that license to create the document. So that's a bit unknown. But the reason why we're so interested in this document is that, as it states from this description, it was, and in this created area, it says that it was created on February 7th, 2022. And the reason why I'm so interested in that document is because that date for the document is because people will recall that on July 15th, 2021, so about 7 months before this document was created, that's when Sarah Bollier gave her presentation about how remains had not been found, and it was actually anomalies or targets of interest in 200, which I'll talk about shortly. So the fact that this document was created 7 months afterwards is indicative of either total inability to listen by the Kamloops Band, or something more fraudulent, which is continuing to make these claims, which were known to be untrue, and extracting money on this basis. So it's not known which it is, but I just wanted to present documents associated with this. Okay, so let's take a look at this document. So what I want to do is just go through this document with you, and as well draw attention to other related documents which shed some light on the claims that are being made in this document. And in the overview, you can see the kinds of things that are being talked about here. And what I've done is I've just separated out each of the slides from the background, the practices and protocols, the lighting the sacred fire, all these things, and highlighted some of the important points that are made in this document. So, as was mentioned, Sarah Bollier's presentation was made on July 15th, 2021. This document was created on February 7th, 2022, 7 months afterwards. And this is from Sarah Bollier's presentation. And if you want to look at the actual presentation, you just click on this link and you can watch, the entire, 2.5 hour kinds of proceedings that happened on July 15th with all the luminaries there, including the legal counsel, Don Worm. Joan Archibald was there. So they're all listening to this presentation that Sarah Bollier gave. And, could they have listened to that entire presentation and not kind of absorbed that the remains of 215 children have been found? It seems very unlikely, but, maybe they just are so, and this is what I talked about in the Brock University talk, is confirmation bias has a lot of influence on people, and you tend to latch onto those things which conform to your beliefs and not really listen to those things that call your beliefs into question. So that's a possibility of the entire thing. Anyway, this here, it's the transcript of this, which shows the actual words that Sarah Bollier was stating, but we see that anomalies, and then we see that only forensic investigation, excavation will be able to conclusively determine this. And this slide was actually presented on July 15th, 2021. So the other interesting thing, as you'll notice, is that 200 is the number, and the 215 was the original number. So that raises questions: how'd it go from 215 anomalies to 200 anomalies? Well, we found out that it was because Sarah Bollier had discovered after the fact, and perhaps she was alerted to this by the SFU Simon Fraser University Archaeology Department, that it had done excavations previously. So the SFU Archaeology Department has been intricately involved in excavations on the site, especially the archaeologist George Nicholas. And they said, hey, just letting you know that in an area where you found 15 of these anomalies, that's where we excavated. And these are due to shovel test pits, not remains. We didn't find any remains. We were just digging for, I think it was land use types of concerns and so on. So because Sarah Bollier on her GPR machine thought that those were remains, that raises the question about the other 200. Like, why wouldn't she be similarly mistaken about the 200 as well? Anyway, CamRes, I'm just going to see if I can click on this here. This is his website. It's a pseudonym, CamRes, because he doesn't want to be punished for making this information available. Graves in the Apple Orchard is his site. And if you look at his site, right, he goes through all of these details about the excavations on the site. So everyone should be looking at that to see, there is tremendous amounts. And the biggest one, of course, is the septic tiles, which I have posted that aspect. Anyway, I'm just going to go back into this. I have posted anyway, that's the slide, which is showing, these septic tiles, right? And a lot of these, right, you recall that Sarah Boley talked about the east-west configuration, right? The way the graves were laid, which she claimed was evidence of Christian burials, but these were not this was not a cemetery. This was clandestine burials. And so clandestine burials, you wouldn't be laying them out in any configuration. You would be just going in there in the dark, the cloak of darkness, and putting down these, burying people in the dead of night. That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, that's important to think about. And now what I want to do is just go through these various slides that were talked about. So in the slides, interestingly, it talks about the background of the school itself. And then it says the truths of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So they're seeing oral histories from survivors as truths. And as I mentioned in my October 29th talk, this doesn't account for misremembering. That's often a major part of these oral histories and the stories of our ancestors buried in the orchard. There's only 2 eyewitness accounts of this, Billy Coombs and Jesse Jules. We don't have independent confirmation that Jules made these claims, because it was through the eyes of Kevin Annett, who's that defrocked United Church minister who also had contact with Coombs. He's been known to have completely outlandish claims about torture chambers and as well the Queen Elizabeth II claim, which Billy Coombs is argued to have made, which states that Queen Elizabeth II abducted 10 children from the Kamloops Indian Residential School in 1964 when she wasn't even there in that year. And also, it's very hard to believe that the Queen would be able to do that because she is monitored extensively. Her schedule is very full and is completely overseen by all sorts of handlers. So how would she and Philip have been able to go and have a picnic and abduct children? So this is the kind of thing that comes out of these oral histories, which, you need to be skeptical about them, especially because they've been remembered in the context of these very emotional settings where you're hearing other people give these testimonies. So it's interesting that the Kamloops band places such a high value. And the other 2 things is this evidence that they started with to claim that's why that they had the GPR. One was the juvenile rib bone that was found by a tourist and brought to the museum. And the other is this juvenile tooth that was found in an archaeological dig. Anyway, Nina Green has had interactions with the SFU archaeology department, and Dr. Hugo Cardoza, who is the chair of this department, sent an email to Nina Green saying that the tooth was identified as not human. So why Sarah Bollier was talking about this tooth when the archaeology department already knew that it was not human, that seems very either shoddy research on her part or some kind of manipulative tactic. We don't know. And then this juvenile rib bone, which the archaeology department has no information on, and no one seems to know where that is. No one has verified this. And what I'm talking about here is that if it's true that this juvenile rib bone constitutes the remains of a child, then this is human remains. This is a missing person. You don't just take human remains and put them on a shelf in the museum. That is absurd that would have happened. And the Kamloops band appears not to have done anything about this. And Nina Green hypothesizes that this is a coyote rib bone, because evidently if you go traveling throughout the landscape in Kamloops, you will find these rib bones all over the place. So that seems to be the likely explanation. Anyway, this is the email from Hugo Cardoza, and he's talking about Sarah Bollier's written report that has not been released, and then the tooth you'll notice here that this is the tooth is identified as not human. That's just the evidence. The reported rib bone was found by a community member or a tourist. So that's his email that he sent to Nina. And then Nina Green was very intrepid about this and wanted to find out more information from the Kamloops archaeology, the SFU archaeology department, and all their interactions with the band. And then George Nicholas, who's the main archaeologist who's been involved in this, said to her, which I find is incredible for a public institution to send, a member of a public institution to send this, that he had been strongly advised by the Kamloops band legal team not to respond to any queries from the public regarding the search for unmarked graves in Kamloops, and that this extended to all members of the SFU archaeology department. And so this is his email right there, which is shocking. I find that shocking. Anyway, so that's just showing that on that slide, on the background, that was created on February 7th, 2022, 7 months after we have all this information that is available, that the band is continuing to release this, either through incompetence and not being able to understand all the information, or due to some kind of manipulation that they are engaged in. We don't know which it is, and I need to stress that. Okay, so that it was the background, and then continuing on with the background, we have on page 4 that ground penetrating radar was initiated because of funding that was supposed to go to the museum. So you can see this here on the slide. They're supposed to go to their heritage park and the museum. And because of COVID, they were unable to use the funds. And so they decided just to reallocate that funding, which was provided by the government for a particular purpose, because the museum administrator, Dina Jules, suggested that this funding should be used to, quote, look for the kids. So this is presumably because of those oral histories about ancestors being buried. And before that time, the Kamloops band had no formal plans to conduct a GPR search. So they just had this money available and said, why not? Let's look for the kids. And so that's what they did. And they sort of searched around for the ground penetrating radar expert, and they asked their archaeologist who's associated with the band, Leslie Laborde, and she connected with Eldon Yellowhorn. And then Yellowhorn, it's implied here, it's not directly stated, but we assume so since it comes afterwards. He recommended that Sarah Bollier be engaged, and she has associations with Yellowhorn. I believe she was a student under his charge, or was at least was asking him to be her supervisor at some point. Anyway, these are the information of all these archaeologists and their connections to one another. Anyway, it's important to note that the $40,000 that was given for the Heritage Park and the museum was a Department of Canadian Heritage grant of $40,000. So one would think that there would be some public accountability, that because the public has provided $40,000 to the Kamloops band for this GPR work, that, and this was allocated on June 15th, 2020, then, and it was supposed to be done on between July 15th and November 30th. But of course, the GPR work was done on May 2021. So that seems to be a misallocation of funds, but it's just a small detail in this whole story. Anyway, so they've got this $40,000 that they couldn't use, so they're going to devote this to the GPR work. And then this is an interesting slide on page 5. It's talking about all the ceremonies, the spiritual supports and everything that were provided during the GPR work. So this seems to be a little bit at odds with what was claimed in the previous slide, which was that Kamloops had no formal plans in place previous to this suggestion to conduct a GPR search. So they've just sort of decided to do that because Dina and Jules wanted to do that. But yet here we are on this next slide on page 5 about all these ceremonial things that were going on and the supports that were for Dr. Sarah Bollier. And then it's asserted that there was confirmation of the children's burials, and therefore they treated things as a funeral. They wanted to honor the children and have a safe space for grieving. And then, they have these weekly visits to the sacred burial site. So they're calling it a sacred burial site. And I should state as well that I made a trip to Kamloops in May, or I think it was June, now that I'm thinking about it, June 2024 of this year. They have it all fenced off with sacred site. You're not allowed to take photos, all these sorts of things with 24-hour security. So they still all have this pretense that it's a sacred site. But anyway, they're saying sacred burial site here. And they're going to drum and sing for the children. So there's all these assumptions being made in February 2022, 7 months after Bollier has said that they're anomalies and not remains, that, they're still making these kinds of claims on this, and maybe it's just was at the time they were thinking this, but it seems very odd that they would be giving a presentation, the band would be in February 2022 with this kind of language, which is being used in this document. Another interesting fact that came out is from an interview, and this was documented by Nina Green, that Manny Jules, who's a big figure, we're gonna see this. He's been a chief, he's a major, sort of respected elder for the Kamloops band. He's been involved in many organizations in the area. He states in an interview on May 2nd, 2022, that he just gets this phone call from his sister, Jeanette Jules, who's on the council, and he's just, having a coffee, what he calls a cowboy coffee, which is around the fire, and because of COVID, and, she's saying, we want to meet. So, and he doesn't really want to go there. And she's saying it's really, really important for him to go there because it's been confirmed, according to Jeanette Jules, his recollection about what Jeanette Jules said, we've got 215 possible unmarked graves. So you would think that if there had been all this sort of spiritual supports and all this kind of community involvement in what was going on for the GPR, that Manny Jules would have been more, he would have heard about this more. But, maybe not. Maybe it's just because he's not on council and his sister's on council. But that seems like a very odd thing anyway. And it's also important to note there that he's saying 215 possible unmarked graves on May 2nd, 2022. That's what he said that his sister said. So how come if she's saying that possible, that got turned into the remains of 215 children being confirmed or being found? Page 6. So this is page 6 on this presentation, this February 7th, 2022 presentation. They have these key dates. And this is interesting to look at here because it's the following the completed GPR, 215 children was notified. So they say that they were notified of approximately 215 children buried. Now that's going to raise interesting questions about whether that was the case or not. We don't know whether they were notified or whether they just thought they were notified. And then it says on May 27th that this is when the Kamloops band publicly announced the findings of the 215 plus. So there was even more than 215 children, perhaps. Anyway. So again, right, we're notified, even though Sarah Bollier had declared on July 15th. So that raises questions about Sarah Bollier, whether she said that to them on May 23rd. I believe that was when she did the GPR. Yeah, so here you see the GPR was done May 21st to 23rd. So on May 23rd, did she say children buried, or did she say anomalies, targets of interest? What was her role in the whole thing? We can't know that at this point, because this report, which was paid for by the Canadian public, $40,000, has not been released, and it was promised by Racel Coy, who is the major fixer for the Kamloops band, who controlled all the discussions that happened on July 15th, wouldn't allow journalists to ask questions and so on, or only one question, and don't ask questions of the elders and all these sorts of things. She promised that the report would be released, but this has now remained undisclosed because she changed her mind. Her promise was revoked. And Nina Green, this is from Nina Green's website. This in this Globe and Mail article, this was a change of heart that the Kamloops band had. First of all, they promised that it would be released, and then they decided that Racel Coy said that would not be released, the report, but that the core findings are contained in the release, and Dr. Bollier gave an extensive presentation today. Now, that's just not good enough, that presentation. As we saw, we got a couple slides, but we need to look at all her analysis and everything. So this is still, and then Hugo Cardozo, he said 5, this is in his email from July 2021. He says that it was reviewed by a designated review team of 5 archaeologists, very experienced in GPR. So we've just got to take his word for this. So who are these archaeologists? These are academics at publicly funded institutions. In order to have peer review and to make sure that results are valid, it's very, very important for universities to be open to scrutiny. And this is being prohibited because of a gag order that has been placed on the archaeology department at Simon Fraser University. So this is very, very unsettling that this is the case. And we really need to have questions asked of the president of Simon Fraser University about this. And what does this mean for this whole research that's going on about the Kamloops case and also the residential schools more generally? So that's kind of so far some of the background related to these slides. What is not mentioned, so they have all these dates, right, as I was saying, the key dates that has been provided on page, I think it's page 5, right? What's the page number? Page 6, sorry, key dates. Sketch it out here. We go down to what's not mentioned. So they mention these key dates, but there's a few things that are not mentioned. And one of the most significant things, which I found out relatively recently due to the research of Nina Green, which was from the book of Tanya Talaga called The Knowing. So Tanya Talaga, for people who don't know who she is, she's a Globe and Mail journalist. She writes a column, a highly, advocacy-oriented column for the Globe and Mail. Again, it's sort of part of the problem with journalism, the double standards that exist for Indigenous issues versus non-Indigenous issues. It was pretended that this press release on May 27th was given to James Peters, and he posted it on Twitter at about 4 p.m. But we found out from Talaga that on May 25th, 2 days before that, there was the press release was in existence and it was embargoed. and only selected journalists, hand-picked journalists, were able to view it. And two of the journalists who were picked were Tanya Talaga and Angela Starrett, and there are probably others that we don't know of. Anyway, this is from Tanya Talaga's book, The Knowing. And there's also an interview from, which has Starrett on there, Angela Starrett, talking about this. And here's Coy, Rachel Coy is mentioned here. Talaga, although she's an intrepid journalist, for some reason she doesn't look at her emails. So she missed the email that came out on the 25th, and she didn't see it till the 27th. And she said that this is where she mentions the embargoed, that they were sending in the email on the 25th. They were sending out an embargoed press release to select journalists who they felt could bring the devastating news to light with sensitivity. And then that's when you see the confirmation of the remains of 215 children. That was the press release. That's what it said on the 25th. This embargoed, it was embargoed. And then it was kept for 2 days while these journalists looked at it, got themselves ready. And evidently it was shared with numerous other entities as well, according to Talaga. So Talaga on the 27th gets on a plane to Kamloops, and she's there, and there's another excerpt from her book where another interesting thing happened, which is we hear from Talaga that on the evening of June 2nd, 2021, she was contacted by her editor about the numbers of the 215 being questioned, and then Tanya Talaga tells us that she contacted Murray Sinclair on the morning of June 3rd, 2021. We needed Murray Sinclair, says Talaga. The Kamloops needed Murray. And so she made the call, and then he told her, you are in the eye of the storm now. Be careful. So what did Murray Sinclair mean by that, Stevens? Anyway, that is quite amazing. And then we have Murray Sinclair, who gave a presentation to the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. You can see that whole presentation. You click on that link, and you can see the transcript here, right, where he says, and this was on June 3rd, 2021, he talked about the RCMP being heavy-handed and ham-handed way intimidating people and intimidating Sarah Bollier. And as a result of, well, it's connected. So at around this time, the RCMP decided not to investigate this further, right? And you can understand why they would be questioning Sarah Bollier, because it's her report. That's where this evidence comes from. So that makes sense. Anyway, Murray Sinclair complained about this, and shortly after, the RCMP turned over the investigation to the Kamloops Band, or completely backed away from it. This is a bit sort of uncertain as to what went on there. That's amazing. So that's a kind of events that were not referred to in those, important events that February 2022 presentation was talking about. Anyway, another event that is not referenced, which is interesting, occurred on the same day as Murray Sinclair giving that presentation, which is June 3rd. 17 lawyers submitted a 14-page complaint to the International Criminal Court. This is an amazing document. And it's here, the entire thing is here. And if you just go into the chevron on the right-hand side, you can look at this document. And anyway, you go down, it's talking about this complaint being made to the International Criminal Court. And on the 1, 2, 3, 4th, it states the complaint, and this is right here, the complaint is regarding the recent discovery of a mass unmarked grave of 215 Indigenous children who were under the forced care of the Government of Canada and the Vatican. The death of 215 Indigenous children resulted from their enrollment in the Government of Canada residential school system, and the specific school where the mass grave has been discovered is the Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. At one time, and then it talks about the complainants submit that the deaths, so this is in the next paragraph, the deaths, masked, unmarked grave, and general treatment of the 215 deceased children constitute crimes against humanity. And then they speculate about mass graves being present elsewhere as well. Anyway, that's a shocking document. And 17 lawyers, if you just scroll down to the end, you'll notice the 17 lawyers, and I have provided them here, which you can take a look at who they are. This is the Aboriginal industry in action. Manufacturing grievances to extract class action lawsuits. And then, of course, the lawyers get a huge cut off of that. And then ordinary Indigenous people get, a few thousand here and there. And then that's all used up in terms of living expenses. So it's really a legally driven thing. Anyway, so I'm speculating here about this situation because I think that this is really quite interesting. You have 17 lawyers. They're constructing this complaint full of legal arguments. Were they plausibly able to do that between May 28th and June 2nd? 6 days, and this included a weekend, so it's really 4 business days that they all marshaled these lawyers together to make this detailed legal argument to the federal court. That's kind of an interesting speculative exercise about the role that these lawyers are playing, and what is the connection between these lawyers and the Kamloops band? How about Don Worm, who's the Kamloops band's legal brain trust, who's going and putting gag orders on the SFU archaeology department? Okay, so page 7. So those are a couple of incredibly important documents, which I think people should be aware of and take a look at them, because they've sort of been forgotten in all the kind of hubbub. And what's the status of this International Criminal Court complaint about crimes against humanity? Moving on to page 7. So this is all the kinds of spiritual ceremonies and everything that have been going on after the announcement on May 27th. And we're told all about the honoring the children, paying respects, the sacred fire, the 4 children as the fire keepers. So you can really see the kind of the marshaling of the community and the kinds of emotional things that are being orchestrated by the band. And then the site, securing the sacred site. So that's kind of important. That's putting the fence around it. Treating it like a crime scene. So crime scene, we need criminal investigation. It's a crime scene. So why is the band not pressing for this criminal investigation if they think that there are these remains of 215 children that are there? And then this is when we first see the mentioning of these, 13 grassroots family. There's so these 13 families, so the grassroots, so they're presumably the important hereditary figures in the Kamloops band. They're given space and time to honor the children. So again, this constant reference to children as if there are children there when this has not been substantiated at all. And my own view on the October 29th presentation is a very improbable hypothesis, and I'm going to explain why shortly. Incident command structure, right? And directing of the flow of information and decisions that are going on. So they created this whole incident and command structure, very bureaucratic, with all the mental health and wellness, finance, languages, communications, natural resources, First Nations Health Authority. They're meeting every day, Monday to Friday, 8:30. So they have these like daily meetings where they're marshaling the incidents and the information. And then on page 10, this is when we get into this, and this is a very important body, as we'll find out shortly. So this is created evidently on June 2nd. A representative from each of the 13 grassroots families. They have this council, and they're providing recommendations to care for and honor the children, which is the children that they're claiming are buried on the site. And then we have the Aboriginal industry in action here, the various resources that are going to be needed for funding of various things. And this brings up the question of the money, which we found out that the Kamloops band, they received over $7 million in response to their announcement about the remains of 215 children being found. And this is detailed $7.3 million. So, one would expect that would be going towards the excavations, but instead it's going through all these various new positions for language and culture and community services departments, resources to host guests, all these sorts of things, right? And this is the reason why they need this is because of the thing that they have basically fabricated. And then page 12, further resource outlays. They need to have a formal event request process that's been developed. And they have protocols, leaderships present at every event. And then we see on page 13, the Grassroots Advisory Council recommendations. And this is very, very important for another reason. Because another document, which is not mentioned here, is on October 18th, 2021. So this was 3 months after Bollier's presentation about the 200 anomalies and targets of interest. They had these 13 grassroots family advisory council. So this is this group. It sends a petition to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau from the family heads. And in this, if you go down to like about the 5th paragraph, it says, in May of 2021, evidence of the horrific act of genocide was laid bare to the world with the confirmation of at least 215 unmarked graves of little ones who attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So that was sent on October 18th, 2021, published in the Globe and Mail. I saw a copy of it myself when I was reading the Globe and Mail. This was, 3 months after Sarah Bollier's presentation. So how on earth could that happen? That you would have such a concerted effort, and then you can see all the family heads. And who do we have here? Manny Jules, who is a major figure in all of this that's going on with respect to this. And he's, all over the map in terms of how he's referring to these anomalies or possible graves, etc. And that what happened there on October 18th was not the only dissemination of false information besides this presentation I'm talking about. On September 14th to 16th, 2021, Roseanne Casimir moved a resolution which was seconded by Chris Lewis of the Squamish Nation that 215 unmarked mass graves. So now we have multiple mass graves. So each of the 215 was a mass grave. We're located at Kamloops. This is amazing here. So you can see this in missing children who attended the Kamloops Center. Was 215 unmarked mass graves of children, right? Located using ground penetrating radar, even though the band was told by Sarah Beaulier that that is not the case. Now, again, maybe they just don't listen carefully. Maybe they're subjected to confirmation bias. Maybe they just misremembered what was said. It's hard to know. Or perhaps it is more concerted and deliberate than that. That's something for us to continue to investigate. And then we have another document which indicates sort of a bad faith maneuver, because the band, if it was mistaken, we can sort of understand that it would say, oops, we thought the GPR was anomalies and so on. But on May 18th, so this was a press release that was put out on May 18th, they're talking about they're going to close their offices for a day of reflection. And then they imply that on May 27th, when they said that the remains of 215 children have been found, that was the press release that they had on May 27th, they're sort of pretending that the preliminary findings came to light, the confirmation of 215 anomalies were detected. So they're implying that that's the wording that they were using, the confirmation of 215 anomalies. But why would they be reflecting? Why would they be having all this grieving, all these sorts of things about anomalies? Anomalies are not the same at all as the little ones or the children, all these kinds of the missing, which is being put forth in this document. Okay, so that is what we just saw there is sort of the final kind of where we are today kind of slide, which is on page 13. Now, I think there's a number of issues that come out of these discussions. So, and I'm saying misinformation. So misinformation, which is incorrect information, which is being spread by the Kamloops Band on 3 different occasions that I have documented, which is this February 2022 presentation, the October 18th, 2021 petition from the family heads, and the September 14th to 16th motion that was made by Casimir at the BC Assembly of First Nations general meeting. So first of all, we have to sort of find out what's gone on with Sarah Beaulier. This is not known. What did she actually tell the band? Like, did she tell them anomalies, or did she tell them the remains have been found? Because that makes a big difference. And as a result of this claim that remains have been found, we have, millions of dollars of public funds being extracted, and we also have these 17 lawyers making, this complaint to the International Criminal Court concerning crimes against humanity, right? So we don't know what happened with respect to this report. And we need really to kind of find that report. We need to get that report. It was paid for by the Canadian public. Was it verbal communication that she made on the 23rd of May, or did she have more written kind of substantiation? And this can come from the archaeology department a little bit, right? They're publicly funded. Why can't we know the name of the 5 archaeologists? And then we could get some more information from them about the methodology that was used. And why should this be hidden? How can they be under a gag order from the Kamloops Band's lawyers? Canadian Heritage, that's the funding of that report. So if $40,000 of public funds were spent, isn't the Canadian public entitled to see a copy of that report? The RCMP's role is very, very important, and we still don't know exactly why the RCMP backed away. Was it from Mary Sinclair? Was it something in terms of meetings earlier? There are indications that the RCMP was aware of that press release on May 25th, So that's quite interesting to look at as well. The role of Tanya Talaga, which we just found out recently because of her book, The Knowing. She's got a lot of information about her, sort of special treatment by the Kamloops band, her connection to Marie Sinclair's involvement in the whole thing. And then the question of excavations. So the Fifth Estate did a program on January 12th, 2022, and it interviewed both Ted Gottfriedson and Manny Jules. If you click on that, you will be able to see it. And you'll notice here that that's Manny Jules, but also Ted Gottfriedson is interviewed. This is his. Ken Gottfriedson said, but our committee has discussed it, and they have said that the children should be exhumed. That was Gottfriedson, and then below is Manny Jules. Says that the representatives of these family heads, grassroots family, that's that organization we're talking about before. The heads of these families made a decision to exhume because the number one job is to make sure that the little ones, I believe it says those little ones, yep, those little ones is the wording used, to make sure that they have a safe return home with all of the honor and respect that they didn't receive in life. So this is Manny Jules, who's talking about later about possible unmarked graves. So, journalists, you need to be much more, you shouldn't just defer to these Indigenous elders. They should be treated with the same respect, which is human beings who should be able to answer questions just like anyone else about what they're talking about. And why hasn't that, as I'm saying here, right? Like the CBC, they told the CBC this. Why isn't the CBC now following up on this and saying, what about these excavations? Anyway, the final thing I wanted to mention, which I think is really the point that makes me really think that it's a highly improbable hypothesis, which is this hundreds of clandestine burials. Like, that's a lot of burials to have, where you have people secretly burying people in the middle of the night, digging graves for anyone who's dug holes in the ground is not an easy thing to do, and it's going to be hard to do that without being noticed. Anyway, we don't have one parent saying that their child never, we don't have the name of one child who never came home from the residential school. Now, this often gets confused, and academics like Sean Carlton, right, who, maybe this is a bad thing, but I think he deserves this label because of his, just being such a bad actor about all these things. Anyway, he goes into this in this posting. I show this, right? He's saying he's taking Jonathan Kay to task because he says that there's records of 51 confirmed deaths at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. Well, those 51 deaths are, over this long period of time, children who died from various things in hospitals and so on at the residential school. So that's important to point out. This is a constant confusion that people like Carlton and Supernon, Negan Sinclair, and Ian Mosby used to be another figure who was doing this as well, confuse the fact that children died while they were students at the school with clandestine burials. Anyway, Jacques Rillard, who has written a piece on this with Nina Green as a researcher, said, is talking about these 51 names. And what you do is you go and try and find all the death certificates about these. And they weren't getting them from Vital Statistics. They were getting them from Library and Archives Canada and genealogy archives. But we could work much harder to get the remaining death certificates from Vital Statistics, right? That's where you need to get them. But even with the information that we have now, we have 35 of the 49 that we know what happened. And the reason why there's 49 is because there's duplicates. Two of the names are duplicated on the record. rates, which again is another problem, is that these numbers are not exactly accurate. And, 17 died in hospital, 8 on their own reserves as a result of illness or accidents. There was autopsies for 4. There were 7 coroner's inquests, and then the burials. 24 are buried in their home reserve cemetery, and 4 at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. So if we could get those death certificates from vital statistics, we would be able to find out more about this. Anyway, so those 51 from the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, that has nothing to do with the clandestine burials that are being talked about. And those two issues need to be separated when we're discussing these matters. Who are the 200, 215 plus children who would be buried there? And how do we know they're children at all? Since it's just anomalies. It's not like remains. We don't know anything about that. Anyway, in spite of all of this, right, from Casimir, Carlton, Talaga, who are major figures in this, us not having a good understanding of the Kamloops case and all these conflations of things, they're going around the country and have the ear of the Canadian government talking about residential school denialism and how residential school denialism should be criminalized, should be part of the criminal code. And it's a very sobering thought because, we need to think about this post that I just did there. So I've done this post questioning all these things. According to Talaga, Sean Carlton, Roseanne Casimir, who are trying to obscure what's happened, did they think that a post like that would constitute denialism? And for people who don't know this, Tom Flanagan and me, the two of us, we are the two academics who have been identified by Kimberly Murray, who's the special interlocutor of missing children and unmarked graves, what she calls missing children, there are cemeteries which are now unmarked. Many of them have been abandoned, and many people, such as Tanya Talaga, don't know where their relatives are buried. Like, that's a completely different situation than saying that there's all these murders that have taken place and all these people are buried clandestinely across Canada. Anyway, so I am in the crosshairs of this whole initiative. So is Tom Flanagan. So is all the members of the research group that I have been involved with for the last 3.5 years. We really need to take this very, very seriously. And it is for that reason that I have done this post and that I'm going to be having this lecture that I did on October 29th, released with the help of Greg Wycliffe. And I'm hoping that there will be an event held next May in Manitoba to discuss all the problems that exist with respect to discussing the Kamloops case in particular, the residential schools a little bit more generally, and then this whole area of indigenization, which has a massive negative impact on academic freedom at universities in Canada. Thank you very much, and I hope that you found this video to be informative.